using AWS Amplify to connect your app to the cloud. So please take it away, Tom.
Okay, thanks. It's a little bit novel, I'll be honest, speaking to such a big group with such esteemed guests, but I'm sure I'll try and struggle. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about bootstrapping your app with Amplify. I've just realised I've left my water in my bag. It'll be fine. Cool. So hello. Yep, so that's me. Very smiley. It was a freezing cold day when this was taken. So that's my Twitter and my email. So if anyone's got any questions or want to talk to me or sort of abuse me for being such an AWS fanboy, then please do get in contact. I love sending emails. Cool. So I kind of want to give an overview of Appsync and Amplify. So you'll get an overview of what they are and some resources to get started, because actually when you, oh thank you so much, but when you start looking, actually there's such a plethora of stuff out there, it's actually really difficult to decipher what is useful and what isn't, so that's going to be really good. But by doing that I want to outline some modern app challenges that we face when we're making applications, give an overview, build something, very, very light on building something. I turned 25 at the weekend and I had many beverages, so my demo is slightly light. I do apologise. But then I'm going to quickly say au revoir so we can have pizza and see Phil's talk.
So if the pizza shows up.
If the pizza shows up. I do hope so. I'm only here for the pizza. So one small disclaimer is that I'm not an AWS evangelist, sadly, but they sent me some really cool swag, which is actually some stickers at the back next to the pizza. Hopefully they don't go soggy with all the oil.
Cold pizza's great.
But I really love what they're doing in terms of making it really much easier and much simpler for web developers to provision sort of actually scalable and secure applications in the cloud. So that's kind of why I'm here talking about it. So it all started when I saw this really great tweet by Nad Davitt, who is a evangelist in the States for mobile at AWS. And he sort of talked about this Amplify community, which I think is like a really sort of interesting thing, because we have lots of communities that are spread over Slack, sort of ones that are great, ones that aren't so great. But it sort of talks about blog posts and events and really cool stuff. And it was this sort of tweet that I saw as well that sort of made me really interested, and it was that sort of word, swag, that sort of got me going. So I was like, oh, why not? I could do something like that. But it also started when a good friend of mine who I used to work with sort of said to me, why are you looking at containers when actually you could be learning about serverless, which actually at the time I didn't really know what serverless was. It was like, ooh, okay, but there's surely a server? Yes, okay, there's still a server. But you know, it was sort of something that I decided to look at. So that's kind of where it all spawned from, really. So we all know the best place to start is at the beginning. But let's take a step back. Ooh, Inception. No, not really. I think sort of I'm quite sort of fortunate because I've come to the web quite sort of more recently in the last few years, but actually I haven't had that pain, that real sort of upset, that crying in the corner, actually trying to provision these really difficult things that actually I imagine quite a lot of people have had. So actually trying to do something really difficult, so really simple, is actually quite difficult. So initially you'd sort of have an app and you'd sort of think, okay, this is kind of cool, really small, lightweight, not very difficult. But then all of a sudden you need an API, and then that obviously connects to a database. And it kind of needs to be secure. Kind of needs some user auth so it can actually interact with this app. Analytics would be kind of nice, and some logging to make sure that the users haven't actually dropped off and the app's still working. But actually that's a lot. We sort of realised that actually what started out as a really small little project is actually now quite a sort of behemoth of a thing. And all of a sudden, that's a lot of challenges we need to face. But also, those are sort of the application problems that we face, but actually, when we're making apps, we have other challenges. So we have data requirements. Excuse me. So we have data requirements, the sort of issue of real time, whether our apps work offline, with low connectivity. But then also we have this sort of underpinning concept of best practice. So data requirements being that we need our data to be accessible on phones, smartwatches, whatever it is, our smart curtains, Luke. Sort of we have users who want to have access to their data instantly. So when my phone goes off because of a Slack message, I also want my Mac app to tell me it's the same sort of thing. It needs to be synced. You want to make sure that actually when we're on the train, we're on the tube, wherever, that things are still going to work and they're going to queue up and then send when we come back online. But really, the real thing I want to talk about in this talk is actually this best practice concepts, because as we sort of make these little noddy apps that sort of on our own, and we don't really mind if they're not secure. Maybe someone from North Korea can hack in and charge our credit card huge amounts of money. That's never happened. But as we start to build apps that are going to go out into the wild and are going to be used, we need to make sure that actually they're secure, they're highly available, crucially because of GDPR as well. But also, I think part of this is there's so much background knowledge, and I kind of want to make it easier for web developers to do this. So yeah. But actually, I keep talking about AWS, and I feel like when we think about AWS, there's actually sort of so much sort of background knowledge, and people obviously think of AWS as this real back-end developer-focused, really heavy DevOps, SysOps sort of thing. And as web developers, it's not really something we'd ever do, because that's some other people in another part of our department who we don't really speak to, because we're sort of over here in t-shirts and they're over there in not t-shirts really, making a slight assumption. But so I think when we think about AWS actually nowadays, it's actually changing. So you can send your code up into space with Ground Station, or you can race a little car around with Deep Racer, which is really cool. So it's actually changing. So when I sort of think about AWS, I try to sort of think about it in this really crude way of 4 main pillars of service. So you have durable storage, where you can put things like S3, so you can put things like images and video. You can have low-cost compute, so you can actually run your business logic. So things like Lambda and EC2. EC2 technically not, I guess, low cost, but we can try and get there. We have things like databases like DynamoDB, so we can actually store our data really easily. More on Dynamo later. And sort of management tools as well, like CloudWatch, so we can actually make sure that our apps are actually sort of working properly. So I've talked about a few services. So these are some that I've actually come across from this Twitter website. It's really good. Twitter website, what was that? But sort of crucially, a few of them I quite like the AWS Elastic Fog Cloud. Say that one really carefully. And then the AWS Hamster as well. So sort of leaving the AWS Hamster to run around in its wheel a little bit. We take a look at how many services there are, and there's over 90. And
165.
100. Oh, thank you. Good. I'll change that for next time. But crucially, we suddenly realised that actually there's a huge amount of services that are very sparse and very different. So things like Ground Station. But crucially, in this talk, we're not worrying about 165. We're actually going to worry probably about 4 or 5, Amplify and Appsync, and then of course they have their own sort of like little sort of connected services, as it were. Cool. So Amplify and Appsync. So Amplify is a JavaScript library that we can use to build out cloud-enabled applications really easily, really nicely. And then Appsync is a GraphQL backend as a service sort of thing that can communicate to one or more data sources, whether that's internally in AWS or whether that's externally again. So you can kind of think of it like Firebase, kind of. That's the way I kind of like try and think about it. So you have these sort of categories. So you sort of have like the bread and butter, the real things that you'd imagine to have. So things like analytics and API, authorization for users. But then you have like really sort of quirky things like sorry, it's really difficult to see at the back, but this says working with AR and VR content within your applications. And I feel like there's going to have been a use case where somebody has said we need some AR and we need some VR in our static web applications, and AWS have gone, we could probably do something about that. But it's really sort of like this, it just shows you what you can actually do, which is really cool. And then you have some sort of like utilities, so you can do things like caching and logging, which is always really handy. So crucially, all of these map onto services in AWS, which is really nice. But of course, they're all handled by AWS. Pricing is determined by usage, so you're never actually paying for when they're idle. And of course, crucially, they are highly scalable. So if we think back to, I've missed a slide out, but if you think back to our modern app challenges, we need to make sure that actually all our devices can access it. So when I looked on the Amplify docs earlier today, crucially you can get SDKs for all of these different platforms. So very quickly we can tick off our first one. So when we think about when we want to build an app, we have a bit of a shopping list really. So we might sort of say, okay, we want a database, we want an API, want some more, some analytics and hosting and storage and that sort of thing. But actually, whoa, hang on a sec. This stuff is really difficult to set up. It's not going to be, okay, I can do that in the morning, I can do that in the afternoon. It's actually going to be a lot harder because we kind of really need to have a lot of pre-existing knowledge to actually get something that is going to be like really what we want to push out to production and actually is like it's going to work essentially. So it's kind of saying a bit like this: I need a database with an API, and that's kind of caveated with the fact that actually the fact that you want an API is a whole other thing. But we're going to sort of say like actually it needs to be highly available, it's going to be secure. So this is the database, and we sort of realise that actually our little sort of side project-y app that we just need a database for is actually really, really difficult to actually provision ourselves. But actually, we could just use DynamoDB because it's so simple, just what we want to do. And when we sort of look at our shopping list on the left here, we can sort of realise actually a lot of the things that we probably might want. I don't really know why Lambda's in there because that's not really a thing, but I want Lambda, but you can sort of say like these sorts of things actually map on to services that Hanson has, which is really handy. And crucially, as part of my talk, they're part of Amplify as well, which is kind of like, oh yeah, it's kind of cool. But crucially, these are engineered with best practices out of the box. So it means that we're not faffing around trying to make them highly secure ourselves. We're not having to try and make sure that they have high availability ourselves. It's done out of the box, which is great. So we can tick off our second point. So to address the rest, we need to look at Appsync. So this is kind of like a really sort of simplified overview of the Appsync process, really. It's sort of so many more things, but I'll sort of take the example that we have a web application, and it's going to be in React because, React. Everything has to be in React these days, doesn't it? And it sort of has like a client wrapping of maybe Apollo, and it makes a request because it's got some config, and it goes off to Appsync that's hosted in a region somewhere, maybe in London, an AWS region. Hits Appsync. Maybe it can sort of communicates with Cognito that I haven't put in here, or maybe it communicates with CloudWatch to say, actually, this is what here. It has a schema, so we have types, this idea of types, if anyone's done GraphQL. And crucially, those schemas have queries and mutations and subscriptions that I'll sort of talk about in a minute. And crucially, they can communicate with other services, things like DynamoDB or Aurora or Lambda, or other external services as well. But then crucially, it's kind of like the domino effect where actually they can talk to other services and it can keep going. And I think that's crucially how it's so powerful. But then it comes back all the way through the chain, hits a resolver, which is sort of resolves it. And then it goes back through Appsync, and then you get it back on your web app, and it's sort of like actually quite a lot simpler than I've just explained. So I kind of talked about 3 operations there. So you have a query where you can get the data, you have a mutation where you can write it, and crucially you can have a subscription where you can listen for mutations on the data source. But because of this subscription, you have the real-time data, which we can tick off, which is pretty cool. This is the shortest one. Out of the box, Appsync supports caching, so we can tick off offline capabilities as well, because you can, which is kind of cool. Genuine picture of me there. And then also, I sort of realised that I haven't spoken a huge amount about JavaScript, so let's try and change that. So I'm going to sort of actually try and demo building an app. And my idea is something I've done before, as Luke said. So I've been doing this for the last 4 years, nearly as long as I've known Luke. So initially it had very static HTML. And then I added some React in because, obviously you do. And then it's sort of still React, and it had some static JSON data, which of course is getting a step in the right direction. And then I hosted it on Heroku, which I hosted an Express app that rendered on a certain route. It rendered the React front end, but then it also had the API on a different route, which of course we know is like a really good engineering practice, right? But it also had MongoLab DB back when it was called MongoLab. But then crucially, I struck gold, and I started to put it on Netlify and AWS, which is of course we know a brilliant thing, because I said so. But actually, have I stopped? Do I want to go all in on AWS? Maybe. So the idea is a coffee finder app. So I've actually been doing this for the last 4 years, and as my bio said, I've constantly rewritten it. It's never been finished, and it never will be finished, but it's a good thing to do. So crucially, it has a React front end. It's powered by Amplify and Appsync, probably on GitHub somewhere. So if we wanted to actually do this, we'd sort of say, right, okay, cool, let's install the Gatsby CLI, because Gatsby is just so easy for us to get going with. Install the Amplify CLI as well. And crucially, we want to say, right, okay, let's create a new, so I realise it's probably not so great at the back, but we'll sort of say, right, okay, we want a new Gatsby site, Leeds Coffee Finder, because Leeds is the best. And we sort of use this template, which is an out-of-the-box authorization starter template-y thing. So when we do that, we then have to run amplify configure in our terminal. This sort of sets up our AWS environment, which is really handy. And it sort of says which region do you want it in. Okay, EUS2, which is London. That's kind of cool. And then it sort of asks us for some access keys and secret keys. But crucially, it sets everything up for us, which is really good. After that, we have to say amplify init, which actually starts our project up. And actually, you can see a lot of the things here say, you might not be able to because it's a bit small, but it sort of says IAM role, and IAM is a sort of really difficult thing to try and explain in sort of the very few minutes that I have left. But it's sort of very fine access and roles about any fine-grained operation in AWS. But it means that it's very secure, which is great. At the bottom here, you won't be able to see it, but it says amplify add API and then amplify publish. So these are commands that you can run in the terminal, which makes it really easy. So if we do that and we say amplify push, this pushes our config up to the cloud. And then we say Gatsby develop, which is npm run start essentially. And we have this, which is really cool. So this, for absolute no code that we've written, other than a few terminal commands, we actually have this. And it actually means that if we click on sign up over there, we actually have user auth out of the box, which is actually one of, going back to the shopping list idea, is actually something that we really wanted. We haven't had to do anything, it's all done. Kind of cool. So yeah, as I say, we've scaffolded a React app. We've got some hosting as well, because it'll be an S3. Bit of work, we can probably put the CloudFront instance there, and Route 53 domain, which is kind of cool. We've also got user auth, which is nice. If we change it up slightly, make it look slightly better, crucially we can make it look a bit like this. But actually we need some data, and let's add in a GraphQL API. So we'll say amplify add API, which kind of cool, and then it'll run through. I didn't put it in, but it sort of run through and say, right, what do you want to add? And we sort of say, okay, we'll step through, change the name. Do you want to add a schema? Ah, yes, I do. I'll say a coffee shop has an ID, a name, description, image, and a rating. Some of them, exclamation mark, means it's enforced. It's kind of cool. And then we'll say amplify push. And so we go to our AppSync console, and this is what it looks like. And we can see there that we have our API waiting. And we can run things like mutations. So what this is where you want to update something. And crucially here, we're actually creating a new one. And we all know that Lane's is the best coffee, right? Anybody who hasn't been to Lane's, like, just go, it's the best coffee. And so we're sort of saying, right, okay, create one, name Lane's, description. And that's the sort of input we have there, opening curly brace, closing curly brace, and then we sort of want to get back the ID and the name. GraphQL being that we don't have to overfetch or underfetch, we can only ever get back what we need, which is kind of cool. And then this is another example where you can list all of them. And crucially, this is where it becomes a bit more interesting that we don't have to over or underfetch. Nice. So I realised that was really quick, and I could cover a huge amount more. But actually, I think it's sort of without going into real details of actually going through massive loads of logs and actually seeing sort of optimizations, is actually quite a nice way to actually make a start, which is kind of cool. But also you can do this in a few lines of code, which is really nice, and it actually sets you up to think more about the code and the application you're writing, and perhaps you don't have to consider the best practices because those are handled by somebody else. But actually, arguably, it's good to have knowledge of those. But I think, if you sort of try and boil the ocean like I have done for the last 4 years, you get nowhere. But anyway, cool. So have I finished? No. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about. This is just the Amplify community page that I showed earlier. It's a really good link, and also sort of shows really good events that are going on. LeedsJS there, it's a really good one, and then sort of blog posts as well. If you sort of on Twitter and you're sort of quite active, these are really good people to follow. So of course the AWS Amplify accounts, but also the evangelists and developer advocates are always really great to follow as well, giving really good insight and tutorials and examples, which is really good. And then I do need to point out there are some great other meetups in Leeds that I've been to. So the AWS meetup, the Leeds Ladies of Code I went to a few months ago, and it was really good. I'd recommend going. And Leeds Front End as well. Cool. And then some really good websites. There's a few there that are really good. But I think the really good one is this, where you sort of actually start out from absolutely nothing and you actually build a photo viewing application, a bit like Flickr, I suppose. So yeah, but I didn't stand up earlier and advertise for any jobs. So if this sounds sort of quite interesting, actually, you sort of maybe want to join us. So and digital hiring, we do hiring developers, analysts, platform engineers, graduates, you name it, we're trying to hire for everybody. We've got offices in Leeds, Manchester, London, Halifax, of course. So yeah, that's me.